May 28th, 2026, these are the most important stories since yesterday. In governance, Illinois became the first U.S. state to require annual independent safety audits of frontier AI developers after lawmakers passed the measure unanimously. In AI, Robinhood opened its stock trading platform and a virtual credit line to third-party AI agents while disclaiming responsibility for agent decisions that the company says may be difficult to monitor or stop. In science, the Chan Zuckerberg Biohub released a suite of open-weight protein biology tools, including a 2.8 billion sequence language model, an atomic resolution structure predictor, and a database of 6.8 billion protein structures. In tech, Huawei's HiSilicon publicly named a 1.4 nanometer fabrication path targeting 2031 that bypasses Western lithography entirely. In the same news cycle, Nvidia disclosed up to $150 billion in annual spending with Taiwan's AI suppliers. In economy, the OpenAI Foundation committed $250 million to worker transition support, economic measurement infrastructure, and research into approaches for distributing post-AI gains more broadly. In medicine, a phase 2 trial of rogarintinib successfully treated SDH-deficient gastrointestinal stromal tumors. This is the first time that an epigenetically driven cancer has been reached by a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. In governance, Iran's national internet flickered back online after 88 days of disconnection, with users reporting heavier filtering than before the February cutoff. In governance, New York's legislature dropped its binding 40% by 2030 emissions mandate and replaced it with a non-binding aspiration of 60% by 2040. Deeper dives on all of this are in today's Century Report, and many are discussed further in today's podcast. Links to both are in the description, or just head on over to thecenturyreport.com. Or if you're already here on the podcast, let's get into it now. Illinois passed something really concrete this week. The Statehouse voted 110 to nothing. The Senate voted 52 to 5. The governor has publicly said he will sign it. And what he's about to sign is the first U.S. law that requires outside, independent annual audits of the safety practices at the largest AI labs. The bill is called SB 315, and it does three things. It requires the biggest AI developers to publish plans for handling severe and catastrophic risks and update those plans every year. It requires those same labs to submit to an annual third-party audit of whether they are actually doing what their plans say, and it protects whistleblowers across the organization. The third-party audit piece, that is the new thing. California and New York both passed laws earlier this year that also required disclosure, publish a risk plan, tell us what your safety framework looks like. But Illinois is the first state to say, and then let someone that you don't pay come in and check. So let me make this concrete. For 3 years, the way that the public has really known anything about how frontier labs handle safety is that the labs themselves have published documents, safety frameworks, responsible scaling policies, constitutional AI white papers. Those documents are good faith, basically, but no outside party has been able to verify whether the procedures that they describe are actually being followed inside the lab. That gap is what people mean when they say that AI safety is unverifiable. And the news cycles of the past 3 months have made that gap painfully legible. Mira Murati testified under oath that OpenAI's founding safety review was bypassed against her objections. She said that during the Sam Altman versus Elon Musk trial just a few weeks ago. The White House pulled a draft federal pre-deployment testing executive order just hours before the announced signing last week. The UK AI Safety Institute found that GPT 5.5 already matches Anthropic's restricted Mythos preview on advanced cyber benchmarks, meaning the most cautious lab's most guarded ability is already publicly available from a competitor. So each of these stories are sitting on the same fault line. The published safety claims and the actual behavior of the deployed systems are no longer the same thing, and no outside party had the legal authority to come in and check. But Illinois just gave an outside party that authority. Now, the vote tally itself says something. OpenAI and Anthropic publicly support the bill. A trade group representing other frontier labs opposed it. The 110 to nothing margin is the kind of number that means something across the entire political spectrum has decided the verification floor is long overdue. The federal layer, though, is still deadlocked. Congress has not moved. The executive order got killed before signing, you'll remember. 3 U.S. states now have meaningfully different binding rules for frontier AI, and the EU has a different one entirely, and China has another one entirely. The UK is positioning for yet another one. Labs are operating across a thickening patchwork that the federal framework was supposed to flatten. but now is visibly not flattening. But the next state to copy Illinois will not have to invent the audit architecture from scratch. It will just have to decide which audits or whose audits count. And a deeper look at this and how SB 315 fits the verification arc is in today's Century Report and on the website. Go check it out. Shifting away to another story here, Robinhood announced on Wednesday that you can now create a separate account for an AI agent and fund it with a specific dollar amount to go buy and sell stocks for you. The Robinhood Gold credit card got the same treatment. Connect an AI to a virtual credit line, set a dollar cap. The agent searches the web for deals and places purchases within that limit. Let's read the disclaimer that Robinhood attached, because it is unusually candid. Agentic trading, this part's a quote, involves significant risk, including the possible loss of your entire investment. So AI-driven strategies, another quote, may perform poorly under certain market conditions, move quickly, and may be difficult to monitor or stop in real time. And finally, another quote, Robinhood does not guarantee the accuracy, completeness, or suitability of any agent output and is not responsible for losses resulting from agent-generated decisions. 3 different quotes there. So the platform shipped the capability and then stated in writing that the pause may lag the agent and that losses from agent decisions fall to the user. That's quite a remarkable statement to publish on a brokerage product launch. It's probably the most honest statement that anyone has shipped on an agentic finance product to date. And both features connect through the Model Context Protocol, MCP. That is the standard that lets an agent reach external accounts by holding the credentials on the agent's behalf. But yesterday's episode of the Century Report covered bad host, you'll remember, the one character flaw in the Starlet framework underneath most MCP servers in production. The patch has shipped and the scanner has shipped, but the broader point is that the layer holding credentials for agentic finance is still very early infrastructure. It's getting patched as it's getting deployed. The cryptographic identity layer that this kind of transaction Robinhood is going for actually needs, such as agentic-specific signing keys, delegation receipts that you can inspect and revoke, dispute frameworks that are built around the actual chain of who authorized what. That does not exist as a finished standard. The FIDO Alliance announced working groups for it at the end of April. Google and MasterCard are anchor participants. The standards are still, right now, being drafted. So let's consider what this means for someone who actually wants to use these features. You tell your agents, go buy a sneaker release when it drops below $300. You have delegated a credit card transaction to a system whose reasoning you can't fully inspect, whose mistakes the platform disclaims, and whose authorization runs through a standard that the industry is still writing. Robinhood says you'll get a push notification on every trade and you can pause AI activity anytime. The disclaimer concedes that the pause may not always be fast enough. The accountability architecture for this will get built. FIDO, MasterCard, brokerage compliance, they are drafting it. The honest version, though, is that the deployment is moving and the standards are simply catching up behind it. And it can be argued that the first major loss event is what will force those standards to cross the finish line, the way nearly every prior consumer finance protection got finalized after the harm landed in court. We'll see what happens. All right, let's shift to another story here. The Chan Zuckerberg Biohub released 3 things this week in a single coordinated drop. The first is called ESMC. It is a protein language model trained on 2.8 billion protein sequences, essentially every protein sequence found anywhere in biology. The second is ESMFold2. It predicts the 3-dimensional structure of a protein from its sequence at atomic resolution. It beats Google DeepMind's AlphaFold 2 on the standard benchmarks and runs roughly 10 times faster. The third is the ESM Atlas, a searchable database of 6.8 billion predicted protein structures that are spanning the metagenomic catalog. All 3 are open weights, open data, open API. You can download the trained models. You can fine-tune them. You can search the atlas. The compute you need to use the models fits on consumer hardware. The compute that you need to fine-tune them fits on a single H100 server. That is one machine. So let's really talk about what this changes. Proteins are the molecular machines of biology. Knowing what a protein looks like in 3 dimensions tells you what it does and how to design something that interacts with it, such as a drug, an enzyme, an industrial molecule. For decades, this was experimental work taking months per protein. In 2021, though, Google DeepMind's AlphaFold 2 made structure prediction tractable from sequence alone. That was a huge generational shift. But the next step, designing brand new proteins that do something useful, stayed concentrated inside maybe 20 institutions globally because the compute budgets were huge. This week, that gate fell. Wet lab researchers running the new stack on consumer hardware reported designing functional binders against novel targets in under 72 hours. Functional means that the protein that they designed in software and then ordered synthesized actually bound to what they wanted it to bind to in a real experiment. 3 days from idea to working molecule on hardware that a university lab can afford. And Biohub published everything: training data composition, evaluation suite, failure modes, architecture decisions. Independent labs are already producing the benchmarks. The pattern of frontier model nobody outside the lab can verify, the one that Illinois just legislated against, does not apply here because the science is immediately checkable. The pharmaceutical R&D pipeline was built on an assumption that the early stage discovery is the bottleneck and that molecules are scarce. The molecules are no longer scarce. Who can run the discovery loop changes, and therefore who can bring a drug candidate forward changes. That is a substrate level shift in one of the most economically gated parts of medicine. All right, new story here. 2 stories on the AI chips that landed in the same news cycle. They are pointing in opposite directions. The first, Nvidia disclosed it is spending $150 billion a year on Taiwan, TSMC fab capacity, CoWoS advanced packaging, a new Taipei research campus, a new headquarters planned by 2030. Jensen Huang called Taiwan, quote, the epicenter of the AI revolution during the announcement. The $150 billion figure is roughly 10 times what Nvidia spent in Taiwan in 2021. The second story in the same week, Huawei's High Silicon division published a technical paper introducing what it calls the Tau Scaling Law. The paper describes an architectural approach to AI chip design that trades raw transistor density for memory bandwidth optimization and chiplet topology. The claim is that you can reach frontier-class inference performance on process nodes 2 generations behind the leading edge without the EUV lithography that U.S. export controls have been built around for 4 years now. Independent benchmarks from Tencent and Baidu show that the resulting Ascend 920 silicon hits roughly 78% of Nvidia's H200 inference performance on standard AI workloads. High Silicon's president, He Tingbo, Wired calls her the chip queen, named a public demonstration before winter 2026 and 1.4 nanometer mass production by 2031, all without Western lithography. Now, these are 2 structurally different bets on what the AI hardware substrate is going to be. The Nvidia bet doubles down on the assumption that leading-edge process nodes are where the frontier lives, that controlling the most advanced fabrication controls the frontier. The Huawei bet says that architectural cleverness can be a substitute for fabrication advantage. Both bets cannot be right at the long horizon. So what this week makes really visible is that the 2022 U.S. chip export control regime was designed around one specific assumption, that EUV-dependent leading-edge nodes were the choke point, and holding that choke point would hold the frontier. The Tau Scaling Law paper is the public documentation that the assumption underneath the policy might be wrong. Huawei has been shipping its predecessor silicon for 18 months into Chinese cloud providers and domestic AI training infrastructure. The Ascend 920 lands inside an already operational substrate. If this holds, the global AI hardware substrate splits into 2 commercially viable pathways. Taiwan leading-edge silicon serving North America, most of Europe, Japan, Korea, and the OECD cloud customers. The Huawei chiplet stack serving China, parts of Southeast Asia, the Gulf states, and a growing share of African data center build-out. 2 stacks, 2 software ecosystems, 2 competing claims to be the cheaper path to frontier inference. The single choke point that organized the last decade of AI hardware investment turns out to be one choke point among several. All right, shifting to a different story here now. The OpenAI Foundation, the nonprofit governance arm that sits above OpenAI's commercial operation, is committing $250 million this week to something it is calling the Economic Futures work. The money goes to 3 tracks. Track 1 is measurement, funding independent academic research on which occupations, tasks, and wage tiers are actually shifting under deployed AI, measured from the data, not from a model card projection. Track 2 is worker transition, so career navigation, reskilling, retraining for a new job, direct income support during this role transformation. Now, both of those are not new. We've done those in previous transitions before, but track 3 is the unusual one. The foundation calls it research into, quote, new approaches to organizing post-AI political economies and sharing economic gains broadly. Close the quote there. Let's read that again. Post-AI political economies. So a foundation announcement from the institution that built ChatGPT is treating post-AI political economy as a category that has to be invented. The announcement accepts as a working assumption that the existing arrangements, the way that productivity gains have flowed through the labor market for the last 2 centuries, will not survive the next decade in their current form. That's the entire reason I do Century Report, so you know why I'm covering this story. $250 million is a small money next to what's actually being named here. OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, the institution producing the capability, is publicly funding research now into how the economic gains from that capability get distributed under arrangements that have not yet been designed. And of course, the commitment is a drop in the bucket compared to what's happening over on the profit side, but it's a start. The Century Report has tracked this conversation for months. Altman has said some versions of it. Hassabis has said some versions of it. Sutskever has said versions of it. The foundation is now putting institutional money behind that framing. And yes, it's a small amount, but at least it's some, and that is what makes this week different from the lip service of the prior public statements. Now, let me try to say something about this story, though, that I think is a far deeper level that we need to be thinking about. I want to be really careful with how this lands. The stated reasons for the commitment are very much in line with what the Century Report has argued since the beginning. The change ahead is monumental. Many assumptions that we have treated as stable are not going to be, and in many ways, that is a very good thing. But there's a layer underneath. The Foundation's announcement uses this phrase, useful but incomplete, about the current studies of AI economic impact. I fully agree. The same phrase, though, might apply to the announcement itself. The very notion of donating philanthropic money to perpetuate economic systems, to fund research that will help the existing arrangement bend gracefully into something else, that may itself be incomplete to the scale of the change coming. So here's what I mean by that. The foundation is operating inside a very familiar form. Capital funds research, research informs policy, and policy adjusts the system. That loop has worked for 2 centuries because the underlying economy stayed coupled to human labor. When the marginal cost of cognitive work collapses, the coupling does not hold. The arrangements built around it do not hold either, and the loop that funds research into adjustments may turn out to be a loop adjusting a system that has already begun to be a completely different system. Now, that's not a criticism of the $250 million commitment. That $250 million is a signal that the institution producing the capability has decided to name the problem out loud and put money, even a small amount, against the design work. And that is a meaningful shift, but we should be open to an honest reading of what the design work might find, which is that the arrangements being designed take a completely different shape compared to what we've been doing with our economy over the last several centuries. All right, let's bring everything to a close today. One story carried the weight. The OpenAI Foundation is funding research into arrangements that do not exist yet for an economy that does not exist yet, while the institution it is governance for is helping to build the conditions that will require those arrangements. The dollar figure, it's small, but the naming it counts. A century of change is unfolding in this decade. For most of human history, the productivity gains from new technology distributed themselves through labor markets because labor, human time, human judgment, human craft, stayed coupled to value. When the marginal cost of cognitive work collapses, that coupling loosens. The arrangements built around it loosen with you. What the announcement accepts, without saying so directly, is that nobody alive has done this before. There is no playbook for distributing productivity gains in an economy where the most cognitive work runs on systems no one is paid to do. The design work has to happen now, before the markets externalize the question onto people who did not choose any of this. So what the $250 million can do is mark a moment where the institution closest to the capability admitted in front of everyone that the answer needs to be invented and now, and that the existing arrangements may turn out to be incomplete in ways that the people funding the research cannot yet see. That admission, made by the institution most invested in the current arrangement, is what will still register several years from now. We'll see you tomorrow.